Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at news, events, and political figures through a generational lens. And today, we are going to be talking about the only thing anybody seems to be talking about, which is the leak of the Supreme Court's draft opinion regarding its most recent abortion case. And this has stirred up all sorts of controversy. It's stirred up all sorts of emotions. We've had protests. Apparently, we've had people protesting at Supreme Court justices' homes.
Schumer's house.
Right.
Leader.
So all of these kinds of things over this issue. Quite frankly, abortion is probably the most divisive issue that we face today. Right. And so we're going to discuss a little bit about that leak and the dynamics of the court. This is something that's pretty unprecedented. I don't recall ever seeing a draft opinion leak. So we'll kind of walk you through the court's process and how it comes to rendering its opinions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the implications of if this draft is indicative of what the court is going to do, what that might mean. And we'll talk about that. And we'll give you a little bit of a refresher on the Supreme Court's two major abortion cases, just so you'll understand what it has said in the past on this issue. So let's start with this leak. So after a court hears oral arguments, the justices will have a conference where they all nine get there and they'll discuss it, and then they'll take a vote amongst themselves to see where they are initially. And once they have that vote, somebody will be assigned to write the majority opinion if there's a clear majority there. That person sets her out writing a draft. And that's apparently what we saw. This draft, it looked like, was circulated back in March. Is that right? A little bit earlier? But sometime early March. And so they'll circulate that to the other members who are in the majority. They'll get feedback. They'll make alterations as necessary. So it's a fluid process,
supposed to be.
And although it doesn't happen often, there is the possibility that the majority changes. And to give you the most recent high-profile example of that, if you go back to NFIB versus Sebelius, this was the original case over the Affordable Care Act. The initial conference, it looks like there's 5 ready to strike down that Affordable Care Act as unconstitutional. But during that process, one of that 5 shifts over with the other 4, and all of a sudden it's protected. And so it can happen. It's very unusual that I would say that it would happen, but it can. So we want to emphasize this is a draft opinion. Until the court issues its final opinion, nothing is set in stone. So we'll see how it plays out. However, everybody has speculated that there is a clear majority on the court to undo Roe in some way, shape, or form. Now, I will tell you, I think even those who thought the court would undo Roe did not expect that the court might do a full-on frontal assault, as this opinion seemed to do.
This is more than just Roe, right?
It really attacked the reasoning of the court in Roe v. Wade, and just took it head on. Which is, I think, not what most expected, even if they started to whittle away around at Roe. So,
and I mean, a lot of the foundation of modern civil rights legislation or Supreme Court decisions have been based upon that Roe versus Wade right to privacy foundation. And so the implications of this are much, much greater than just the abortion issue itself. And as Professor Davenport said, we had been waiting for this, right? We've been waiting for the issuance of this opinion since last year, right?
When they heard the case, that's right.
We knew, and we also were very aware that it was going to occur directly before you have primaries for this midterm election.
That's right.
And so this is a lot of juice, right? You want to talk about an October surprise coming in May.
Right.
I mean, this is a huge one. So the leak, I want to ask you, because I've got certain, thoughts about it. What side do you think the leak came from?
I have been asking myself who benefits most from that, and I can't figure it out. To me, it seems that both sides have good reasons to do it, and both sides have really good reasons not to do it. But if the majority wanted to say, okay, let's get a feel for what public reaction is going to be like if we send something out like this. Well, they got that answered real quick, right? And if that was let's see what happens, and if it's too much heat, we can revise this. Maybe so. I can see where those who would oppose this feel like, hey, this will really light a fire under our pro-choice folks and could inspire different outcomes in the elections than what we might have thought of, right?
Should the political party use it properly.
Right, so, and that's no guarantee. We both know that.
Never a guarantee.
So to me, it just seems like both sides have some motivation as to why they might do it. And for the life of me, I just haven't figured out which side benefits most from it.
So I hear, and I agree with you, right? I think if it was the liberal side, absolutely, it was to give those Democrats as much ammunition and as much fuel as early as possible in the campaign season. If it's on the right side of things, if it's on the conservative side of the court, I almost wonder if, one of those five is not as solid as they may seem. And again, you've kind of heard maybe inklings about Kavanaugh maybe being the one that may waffle. So we'll see. This public scrutiny, I think, has caught them a little off guard, to be honest. And if you read the actual opinion, and I'll get into it in a minute, but like I said, the implications of this really are foundational to a lot of the rights that we're not even associating yet, with this case, including the banning of contraceptives, which we're hearing about in states right now, some of those 12 trigger states, right? So you've got about 26 states right now that once, or if, I should say, if the opinion goes through as is written, abortion becomes illegal at least partially in 26 states. In 12 of those 26, immediately, those states have passed trigger laws where it is all the way banned as soon as that draft opinion comes out, even though our law is, we're done, right? We've put some interesting legislation in.
We passed really this trigger law here in Oklahoma last session. We've passed a couple of other abortion restriction laws this session. I guess those become mute if the trigger law comes into effect, right? So that's going to be interesting to watch to see how that plays out. Lots of concern about not just contraceptions, but how do states that have these total bans treat citizens that live in those states that ought to leave those states to go get an abortion in another state? And the complications, I think they run into some really hard issues relating to the Commerce Clause.
Extremely hard. And not just that, but bodily autonomy. I'm seeing stuff on Twitter that just horrifies me. Women that have IUDs that live in these states now that are banning contraceptives. So what happens now with that woman's IUD? And we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, right? So the foundation here that Alito is kind of using is Plessy versus Ferguson, right? And this is allowing, or what Plessy versus Ferguson did was allow the states to violate individual rights regarding segregation. And so basically the language simply kicks things back down to the states, right? In terms of a lot of these rights that are, and I quote, not in the Constitution, right? You'll remember some podcasts ago where I went on a huge soapbox about that 9th Amendment thing. This is the time. Right.
So let's go back to Roe for a second, just to make sure people understood what the court said there, and what the court, first of all, said, if you take pieces of the Bill of Rights, if you take parts of the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Ninth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment, and you piece them together, you create what the court calls this penumbra. I love that word. Penumbra of privacy, right? And what they mean by that is it may not be clearly defined, but it's there, right? And I will say there are some pro-choice people who did not particularly like the way the court constructed that argument in Roe v. Wade, right? That's not to say that they were opposed to the outcome, but they felt like that the way the court constructed that argument left it open to some attacks like what Alito's doing right now. And that there was a stronger way to assert that. And I think if they wanted to, they could have really built it on the Ninth Amendment.
I agree.
If you look at that time that the Constitution was written, very few of the states, if any, had laws actually outlawing abortion like we're seeing people trying to implement today,
Absolutely.
right? And so that would have, now, there was stigma, there was social stigma, and this kind of stuff related to it, no doubt about that. But as far as legal penalty for it, if I remember correctly, there were not a whole lot of states that did that. And so it would have been perceived as a right, even if it was somewhat, askance.
Right.
Nonetheless, that's what the Ninth Amendment does. And Dr. Stacy and I have told you guys that's a really important amendment that we don't emphasize enough.
It is. Especially because this conversation now, this argument that I continue to hear is, well, abortion rights are not in the Constitution. Well, my right to be alive as an interracial person was also not in the Constitution. We can talk about all sorts of rights.
Right. There's no specific right for you to get to choose where you're going to live.
Nope.
There's no specific right for you to choose where you want to go to school. There's no specific right. None of that's listed in the Constitution, right? We assume that it is a right because our ability to make those choices existed prior to the Constitution. And they were respected as such. And the Ninth Amendment was designed to ensure that we could continue exercising those rights. Now, so the court says we do have this right to privacy, right? In Roe v. Wade, what the court said was during the stages of pregnancy, the right of, or the responsibility of the state, or the state's interest in protecting the life of the unborn child grows the longer the term of the pregnancy grows, right? So in the first few months, the first trimester, it said, the woman has pretty much all the rights she wants to terminate that pregnancy, right? Without interference of the state. The state had no legitimate interest in interfering with that. You get into the second trimester, and then the third trimester, they said, okay, the state's interest grows at that point. And they go so far as saying in the third trimester, states can pretty much ban abortions if they want to. They don't have to. It never said they had to, but they could, right? In Casey, the court came back and revised that a little bit. They did one thing that muddied the waters. They said, well, the states can't pass laws that impose an undue burden on women. Well, what the heck is that? Right? So that's a little unclear. Anytime they use language like that, it sure gives a lot of leeway to test this stuff out. But then they also said, rather than building on that or maintaining that trimester framework, they basically said the point of viability. In other words, the point at which the child could be born and survive outside the womb, that's the point that the state has an interest in protecting its life. And that has been the case since the 1990s when that case was decided, right? And then the Roe v. Wade was guiding up through from the 70s. And the court has had lots of abortion cases relating to what can states do, what can states not, but they were all built and decided around those two fundamental cases, Roe v. Wade and Casey. And so, is that the right balance? Is it not? That's always been let's not pretend like everybody was just like, oh, this is the best that there can be. There's always been political conflict over this issue. It involves moral issues. It involves, in some cases, economic issues. It involves a whole bunch of issues that matter to people internally. And so it has always been a very volatile political football that both sides have used to try to defeat the other side in elections, motivate their bases, these kinds of things. And you're going to see that again probably in hyperdrive this year. So where do we go from here if we accept that case, the draft, is indicative of where the court is going to go? And that is... You're going to have some states, like Dr. Stacy said, they're already ready. They've got trigger laws in place. If the court strikes it down, they're going to have a total ban. And that involves a whole bunch of questions. It does. Right?
What about the women who already have them scheduled? I mean, this is a complex issue.
And how are you going to, if you make it illegal, what kind of punishments are you going to be involved in? And who's going to be enforcing that? And who are they going to be enforced upon? And are we going to be having checks at the border of each state that,
I mean, you have daughters. What do you,
listen,
how does that play out in your mind?
I come from a very pro-life family.
Sure, I know that.
And you would think so with 5 kids. And so I have supported certain restrictions on abortions, right? My concern is that these total bans are going to cause a greater restriction in human freedom than they are going to benefit the society through
right.
As the pro-life folks would say, protecting the lives of these children, right? I just think the costs are going to be much higher than what anybody's expecting right now. You've already mentioned some states. I read an article yesterday. Some states are already talking about, hey, we're going to come after your contraception too. And you have to, I have to assume if they're going to be serious about these bans, they are going to try to set up some type of regime to prevent their citizens from traveling to other states to get abortions in those other states. We've already seen states sue each other over stuff like this. So the state of Oklahoma and Nebraska, if you guys remember, they sued Colorado when Colorado legalized marijuana because of the impact they said was on there, and the court said, go away.
Exactly.
And so, but you're going to set up this kind of conflict between the states over this issue. I think it gets a lot messier than people are thinking, a lot quicker.
So, interestingly, number one, you kind of segue into Axios. They have a polling station known as Generation Lab, and they do a lot of polling of the youth. And over half, they just put out a poll on Monday. Half of young women in their 20s say they will still obtain an abortion if they want one, whether it's legal or not. And so, I mean, that plays directly into how are these women in these states going to go about that? Then you have the added layer of tribal sovereignty. Welcome to Oklahoma, kids. So now we have a bigger question about whether or not the tribes are now able to help the women in Oklahoma provide abortion, since they're technically not beholden to that trigger law, right? Right now they have no abortion providers on any of the tribal nations that we have in the state. That very well could change.
And McGirt raises its head. It's amazing how many issues that case shows up in. So yes, what are the tribal governments allowed to do?
That was a shocker.
And this is just, I'm telling you, I think it does cause a whole lot more complications than what people are thinking. As someone who wants public policy to be geared towards benefiting and protecting the lives of these children, I still think that there's a point at which you're not really doing anybody any favors, and I think these total bans, as much as I would love to live in a world where we didn't need them and we didn't have any, we don't live in that world.
We don't.
And the total bans are things that are going to come back and cause, I think, greater harm than
I mean, and economically speaking, I mean, who's taking care of these women, right?
The question that has always been part of the pro-choice argument, right, is that you're going to make these women have these children, but you oppose the social safety net necessary to care for them. And I think in many cases that's a valid argument. I do think there are lots of, not enough, especially if you're talking about a state that says no more abortions. There aren't nearly enough groups that come along to support single mothers or mothers in some type of challenge who find themselves pregnant. There aren't nearly enough of those to help what will be the need for that. So people need to decide, what are we going to do for this? And I just think that it is really, really going to be an interesting, and I think the impact on the elections is going to be interesting as well. Right?
I agree.
And now in Oklahoma, I can tell you, everybody on the Republican side is going to run, this is what we're going to do.
Have you seen the T.W. Shannon ad?
And so, it's going to be that way here, and in some of these other states that have the trigger laws, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see Democrats on the other side really pushing to the opposite end, and probably in states like California and New York, to the opposite end of the extreme, right? And so, and by the way, pushing people to the extremes is never really a great way of going. I'm just democracy, saying, right? So this is something to watch, and it's something to keep in mind as far as how the public is going to react, how voters are going to react, what will Congress do or not do? I know the Democrats were trying to push through something that
failed yesterday,
and I don't think anybody expected that.
No, it was about putting those votes on record, right?
Exactly,
and putting people on blast. I have one more question for you. I know you're trying to wrap up. It's his wrap up voice, right? I'm seeing polls now, NBC, Washington Post polls, regarding the legitimacy of the court, and you've got a wide swath of a majority of the voters at this point saying that they would support term limits for Supreme Court justices at this point. What do you think about this?
Interestingly enough, I think you could see an alliance between progressives and conservatives on that issue of term limits on justices. I don't know what I think about that.
Fair.
But it was discussed at the Constitutional Convention.
Sure.
I think it's not an idea that is out of the realm of feasibility. I just haven't bought in wholly to that as well. I do think, I'll tell you who's really, really super concerned about the legitimacy of the court right now, and that's Chief Justice John Roberts.
He better be. He should be.
And he is, I have to assume he is doing some lobbying of some of those folks saying, trying to peel somebody away, right?
I would assume so. I mean, right, because you have, I mean, these people are not accountable to us. They are not accountable to us whatsoever. They're there for a lifetime. It just, I would imagine that when you have, over half of your population saying that they don't want something overturned and you're trying to do it anyway, that's going to be a pretty big backlash.
I tell you what, maybe we'll see where this goes, but I'll tell you what I would almost be in more favor of than term limits on the justices would be an expansion of the members.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Now, I don't want one president adding 4 or 5 new justices.
Right, we don't want to stack it, right.
If we could do that over a period of years where we add, I think it would do a couple of things. It would make that court a little bit more representative of the population.
More balanced.
And I think that's a good thing. Now, the court isn't supposed to be like the House or even the Senate, where it's a legislative body. It's supposed to, but having a little bit more diversity of voices on that body might be helpful.
You mean having more than 3 women on it?
That could be. Maybe, having some people who didn't go to Harvard and Yale on there. I'm just saying. If you're looking for diversity, So there are lots of ways of achieving that. But I think maybe expanding it a little bit. You don't want it too unwieldy.
Right. What do you think? 12, 13?
12, 13, somewhere around that. I could even see 15.
15 would be okay. I think that would be my limit, though.
I think so. And then if you want to impose some term limits, okay, we can look at that too.
Or maybe treat them like junior and senior senators.
You could do something like that, right? So
we're spitballing here.
We're spitballing here. We're just kind of throwing out ideas.
We're saving the democracy, people. This is what we're doing.
But that's why, that institution has maintained its credibility.
Exactly.
It's been able to maintain itself above this fray, right? And be perceived as not being down in the muck like the members of the House and Senate or even the president. The Supreme Court's approval rating has always been much higher than any other institution in government.
Right. And it's because they've been largely reflective.
And we're seeing it take a hit on this. It's taken hits before, and it didn't always turn out well. So right after not Plessy versus Ferguson, but the Dred Scott case, that occurred, and the North basically wrote off the Supreme Court. Basically said it is beholden to Southern interest, and we don't care what it says. What that lead to? Well, it led to Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War violating the habeas corpus provision of the Constitution and getting away with it. Basically, the court said, it went to the court said, you can't do this, and he said, stop me, I got all the guns. and he kept doing it because he could, and Congress wasn't going to hold him accountable.
No, absolutely.
So if you don't want a situation where you have a president or a Congress that feels like they can ignore the court, we need to be thinking about its role in our society and what keeps it having influence with these other institutions. And getting too far afield from where public opinion is can undermine its credibility.
I know that it's not supposed to be partisan, but it begs the question, right? You've got a majority of these folks that were put on the court by 2 Republican men, right? W. Bush, certainly, and Donald Trump. Is what we're seeing a reflection of that?
You know what I would also do is I would get rid of these public hearings for them.
Me too, I agree. It's just a circus.
It's a circus, and it causes people to showboat for the media, those senators to showboat. It causes them to try to curry favor with certain special interests and such, and it doesn't do anybody any services. Are we getting good quality justices on the bench?
Right.
So those are, hey, we've already outlined some reforms that you can do for the court.
Get on it, people.
And maybe save its legitimacy for another generation or two.
We'll see. This will be an interesting one. This is, I mean, certainly the camel that could, the straw that breaks the camel. But you know what I'm talking about.
No, it absolutely
in terms of the Supreme Court's legitimacy, this is, it's highly in question. And I guess we'll see before the end of June what this opinion is going to be.
That's right. We will keep on top of this and keep you informed as soon as the court releases its formal opinion. And we've got other issues going on. We got a lot of breaking scandals in the state of Oklahoma. That
have you had some swappies recently, friend?
We're going to come back and revisit those and perhaps have a special guest talking about this new legislative investigation into that matter as well. So we'll see you guys next time. In between now and then, if you have any suggestions, criticisms, ideas that you would like us to cover, you can reach us at
notmygeneration@radar.rose.edu.
And we'll see you next time.